All right, let's head over to the Zoom line where we've got Mr. Terry Etam on the line with us, Canada's greatest export, who might have a tariff on him one day. Hey, if I subscribe to your BOE report, am I going to get tariffed? That's
What
the question
happens?
at hand here.
It is a good question, and it depends. Is it 3 o'clock or 3:15 that you join? Because the tariffs are different. So
Oh, I see. That's right. It does. It's like
they,
the time zone. We go back in the fall and put the tariffs ahead in the spring, right? Is
I
that how
think
that
so, except
works?
it's more often. It's like
Uh,
by the hour now. It changes. Everybody on here is on pins and needles watching for tariff news. It's a big deal up here. So
I
I guess it kind of
actually
is down there.
I have another story that I wanted to float your way, which I'll preview now because I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you're aware of this. I was going to send it to you last night, but we have a home show coming up this weekend, as you can see.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Crude Life actually is going to be interviewing home show vendors about energy efficiency tips and just hey, how the oil and gas is powering their world basically. So it should be like shooting fish in a barrel, in my opinion. But I did want to ask you about Alberta lobbying to become a state of the United States or something along those lines. So, oh, you're smiling. Good. You know about it. We'll get to that. All right. Good.
Oh
Let's talk.
sure.
Let's talk tariffs. So, my understanding is tariffs were supposed to go into effect like today, tomorrow, or something like that. They've been pushed back a month. Certain items are being tariffed, certain items are not. Jack Daniels has a comment I'm going to ask you about as well. What say you on the tariff deal? What's going on?
So the history goes back a little more than that. Even I think right after President Trump was inaugurated, he announced, and there's just been so much confusion. One of his documents that he signed on day one was a statement of how by April 2nd there would be imposition of tariffs on Canada and Mexico, pending a report by I think there's a Secretary of Commerce and the Department of Homeland Security or something, because this is there's a couple of reasons that the tariffs are being put on. The headline item is that it's a fentanyl thing, and which is totally makes sense. It's out of control up here. We don't even know what's being produced up here and what's being shipped, and the statistics are misleading. What we say is going across the border, in my opinion, anyways. And so I understand the indignation there. And then the tariff history is that back shortly after inauguration, Trump said that he would be putting tariffs on February 2nd, which is 2 months ahead of time. So we all freaked out about that. February 2nd came. We're all waiting for the announcement, and then we hear, oh, it's been pushed back to March 2nd, and then it's been these iterations almost hourly. Our trade representatives are talking to the U.S. trade representatives, and they have one expectation, and then Trump says something else. So I think it's yeah, Trump he's a master at negotiations. He just is, and I think he's has a his analogies are very apt. I think, like when he talked to Zelensky in the Oval Office, and he was very blunt. You don't have a good hand. You shouldn't be playing. You're playing. You're bluffing way too much here. You do not have a good hand, and I think he understands the game very well. What's leverage and what isn't, and what the objectives he wants. So um, we're us poor Canadian citizens, and you alluded to some Albertans that want to become the 51st state. We feel most of us, especially out west here, feel trapped between a rock and a hard place. We've had a federal government that just kind of led us into a situation. They were very European in mentality, and I suppose sort of like the Biden administration too, is like green energy over everything. These overbearing regulations, censorship of the internet, all these things have been piled on and piled on and piled on by Trudeau, our fearless leader. And so we're laying under this big burden of stuff. And part of the problem was that we let the drug scene get out of hand here. Like there's the fentanyl problem is all over. Like downtown Calgary, 5 years ago there was none of it, and now it's rampant. I go out at lunch and I step over bodies literally that are just like, and it's zero, or mine. It's 32 degrees, and we're stepping over bodies. They're just whatever. Um,
Are you for
and
real?
Oh yeah, literally. I just walked around a couple. I went and met a buddy for coffee for lunch, and I just stepped around a couple, and they're right out in the open with their little foil things, or they're hunched over in that weird stance that they have when
And
they're up.
they're shooting, sniffing, snore. I have absolutely no idea how you take fentanyl, but of course I was on it when I was fighting cancer. Like after all the surgeries, they put you on fentanyl, right? But it's
Yeah,
monitored and you have no idea what's going on, and it's a different deal. But
right.
how does
I
somebody
should.
do that in the open market? I have no idea.
I'm not even sure that it's fentanyl. It's just everywhere, and the people that supposedly know about this tell me that's what it is.
Okay,
They have their little lighters and the little pieces of foil with that they put the drugs on, and I assume then I don't know. It's and
okay.
maybe it's something else entirely. It's some drug that wasn't here 5 years ago. That's all I
Obviously,
know.
it's not meth because meth, they'd be
Yeah,
acting all erratic and crazy. Meth
yeah,
people
no.
don't stay still. They don't stay still.
Oh, okay.
And
This is
so,
not meth. They
no,
they go.
yeah, meth is like one of the most. If anybody is been even remotely close to meth, I will get out of that room so fast because
Oh,
that is, oh, they're so unpredictable.
oh wow.
Unpredictable. Oh, with their behavior. Yeah. And the
Mhm.
energy is just chaotic around them and you can feel it. And it's just so bizarre. But anyway, this isn't how Canada apparently is exporting drugs to the United States here. But
Yeah, well, that's part of the problem, I think, with the tariffs, right? Is that like, and then there's nobody really knows is Trump just leveraging for better trade agreements with Canada and Mexico, which is part of it,
well,
part of the equation, and part of it is the drug thing. So
is anything okay, like India, for example, and China? If we want to sell into those countries, there is such a high premium, a tariff, if you will, that it makes things unaffordable for the average person. So basically, the rich people maybe can order it. They probably do it on Amazon or direct now, but that's an issue because if Ford wants to get some cars in there, well, they got to pay a tariff, and it makes it a little bit more difficult.
right,
And I get some of those things. We've had a real problem with the sugarcane industry down in the South area where there's all kinds of documentaries on the subsidization of the sugarcane industry and the sugar
right.
beet industry and all these different things. And so I even get some of those different things to try to manipulate the market, ethanol and et cetera, et cetera. So what is it that Canada, I mean, are there specific products? Are there anything that's being exempt? I love the Macintosh caramels. Am I going to have to pay 25% more now to go up and get my
You
bootleg
might,
Macintosh caramels?
you just might, but there are definite trade irritants. The dairy industry, for one, in Canada is absolutely protected, and this is mostly a Quebec thing. They have a lot of smallish dairy farms that have they're guaranteed a certain substantial price for their dairy products, and there's this very protectionist industry to keep them intact. And so American dairies tend to be much bigger, and especially close to the border there. Yet they could send a lot of product into Canada, and so we have this wall on dairy products, and I know that's a big irritant, even though it's not big dollar value. It's a big irritant for the U.S. administration, and I get it. It's unfair when we say, oh, we want you got to be fair on trade, but then it's you can rightfully point to, like, what about this industry or the banking industry? Trump has said that the U.S. banks can come into Canada and operate up here, and then Canadian people will say, oh, that's not true. There's U.S. banks here, and that's sort of true, but they're very restricted compared to what Canadian banks can do. But yet Canadian banks can operate freely in the U.S. So there's very real reasons for the U.S. to be upset with Canada trade wise, and then functionally you just see the Canada's had some very good deals in the past, like with the Auto Pact, where it was essentially sort of a free trade agreement with the U.S. And a lot of manufacturers set up shop in Canada for whatever reason, maybe the cheaper dollar or something. And so now a lot of auto manufacturing happens in Canada, even though the market for the cars is in the U.S. Now it's very complicated because parts will go back and forth. The Wall Street Journal did a story about a piston for an engine. It crosses 7 borders before it finally is sold in the U.S. Some of it's made in Canada. It goes to Mexico for forging or whatever, casting, and then it comes back to the U.S. for machining, and then it goes back to Canada in a sub-assembly, and back and forth and back. So it's a very integrated, complicated market. And then it's tough to figure out because you have to try and think what level Trump is thinking at when he's thinking about these things. And part of the reason Canada's been able to get away with some of these trade practices, or we can sell ourselves as like a better place to do business or whatever, is because we don't spend anything on defense. We have 60,000 members in our Canadian Armed Forces. I think you have well over 1 million in yours. And we have nothing for equipment. We can't hope to patrol. We have almost 10 million square kilometers of territory and 60,000 troops. We have no hope of defending the North. We can maybe detect if something's coming in, but we can't defend our coastlines, and we just don't have the personnel. So that's part of that, is like Trump saying to a lot of countries, no more free ride. Why are we protecting you for nothing?
So you're telling me that like Halliburton could just take over your military, no problem.
Maybe they have already. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? I mean, I'm just thinking of Blackwater. That wasn't that their
Blackwater, yeah.
Yeah, that was their military arm, right?
Right.
Anyway, so when we're talking about these tariffs, go ahead.
No, I would just say it's a very complicated thing, and it's like there's a lot of things that have built up over time. And one thing that Trump has come in and done, and a lot of what he's doing is necessary to me. Like to see real change, you kind of had to smash up the existing structures. And I mean, he's doing it everywhere, so it's chaotic everywhere. But I think that was inevitable. If someone wants to see some systemic change, that was going to happen. I don't think people expected it so much on the trade side, because the tariffs really will hurt American citizens as well as Canadians. And we see that. There was a Fox News story day before yesterday about a truck for sale somewhere in Ohio, and the sticker went from $80,000 to $100,000 because of tariffs overnight. This is the result of tariffs. Now, is in an inventory, so I'm not sure how they actually figured that out, but there will be real impacts like that if these tariffs come home to roost. And if Canada retaliates, then there's a whole question about whether that's really a wise thing to do against the most powerful economy in the world. But that's out of my hands. So,
is the oil and gas that transports through the state of North Dakota and from the oil sands, and where does that go, down to Cushing, I believe, down to Cushing? Is that where it goes?
Well, it kind of dissipates throughout the U.S. So oil and gas are very interesting.
But the long form question is, will they be tariffed? But go ahead. Okay. So
they will be tariffs, but so on some products that are shipped to the U.S. And the example I use is like sofas. Let's say somebody makes a sofa in Canada and sells it in the U.S. because a U.S. dealer buys them. Now the price of that sofa might go up by 25% because that tariff just gets slapped onto the border, and he's ordering it from Canada, so that's what he's gonna have to pay to get it. Oil and gas are different. The price is set in the U.S. market because it's the big U.S. market. So if oil is WTI is a price set in the U.S., if you add 25% to cost to Canadian oil, that won't bump up the price of WTI. WTI is what it is. So Canadian producers have to eat it because WTI will only ever trade at what that is. So the producers will eat the cost of oil and gas that goes into the U.S., but the flow won't stop. That would make everybody less profitable here, but the oil will still flow, the natural gas will still flow, and the oil goes. A lot of the Canadian heavy oil goes to various refineries around the U.S. Like I know there's a big refinery in Minnesota that takes a lot of Canadian oil. There's one in Ohio. I think they're all over the place, and the Gulf Coast in the U.S., where a lot of them are built to use heavy oil. They were designed to take oil from Venezuela and Mexico. Like Mexico used to produce millions of barrels out of the Gulf of Mexico, or whatever it's called now, Gulf of America. But their production's like fallen off a cliff, and now, of course, the U.S. doesn't import anything from Venezuela. Those were two heavy crude sources. So those U.S. refiners are more dependent on Canadian oil than ever before. So to say the U.S. doesn't need Canadian oil is kind of like, as Trump is fond of saying, that's not quite true. It's like, well, you do for quite a while anyways. Perhaps the U.S. could develop their own heavy oil reserves. And I know there's a lot of heavy oil potential in the U.S., like in California, but it's going to take a long time before that would ever get developed to the size that could meet the U.S. market. So, and then you'd have to fight California then too. So yeah. So and then oil actually flows into the U.S. on the Enbridge, the famous Line 5, and then it flows through Michigan and it flows back up into Canada. So Ontario and Quebec get oil from Alberta, but it goes through the U.S. first. So I have no idea how the tariffs would even work on those kind of flows. So
I heard a rumor that Canada might be flirting the idea of sending the oil west to Europe, Russia, I don't know, whoever's, I guess, west instead of the traditional way, which is happening now. Have you heard that up there in Canada?
well, it's sort of a rumor. There were pipelines proposed in Canada to go like from Alberta is kind of the core oil producing region. 10, 15 years ago, companies tried to build a line to the west coast, Northern Gateway Pipeline, which would have been a big one. And they also tried to build one to the east coast, Energy East, it was called, and it was going to go all the way across Canada. And our federal government blocked them because there's no future in oil, and we're going green, and we don't want this resource developed. They actively they landlocked the oil in Alberta. So the only way out was to rail car it, or there's an existing pipeline that goes. There's a couple of existing pipelines, ones that goes to the east coast or to the west coast, and that got twinned, the Trans Mountain expansion. So that helped to take some oil out of the country. But we've been kind of landlocked here. So now it's very ironic to those of us in the oil patch here that everybody across the country is now in favor of pipelines, including all of the politicians that blocked them for a decade. So now we have these hypocrites in the federal government saying, yeah, we need to get together as a country and build more pipelines to the coastlines. It's like, yeah, well, you blocked them for a decade. So now that you're a feeder to the fire, all of a sudden you like pipelines, but it's kind of too late. So it's those pipelines wouldn't get built for, I mean, if we declared a national emergency and the government cleared all of the red tape, which is in Canada is asking a lot, it would take 5-7 years would be my guess before you could get that done. I mean, if it was a true emergency where we showed we were serious, it could be done in maybe like 3 or 4 years, but that would be that's almost inconceivable. So we're essentially and we're a natural market for the U.S. and it makes sense for us to sell our product there. Like you have the refineries that can use it. We have 160 billion barrels sitting in the oil sands, which is it's a huge resource. Last North America forever. Energy security for North America. So, but
Now, is American energy prices going to go up and Canadian energy prices, or are one of them going to go down and the other go up? I'm still a little bit hazy on the whole tariff thing.
right. I'm not sure that anybody really knows. I don't think there will be pockets where it will go up. There was a story about a guy named Patrick Dahan from Chicago. He's a gas buddy on Twitter. Excellent follow. He wrote immediately about what would happen, for example, to the price of gasoline in New England, in the U.S. New England, the Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, they get a lot of their gasoline actually from a Canadian refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. And so tariffs would impact them immediately. And he said those consumers would see, I don't know, 20, 30-cent spike in gasoline prices by the end of this month. That wouldn't necessarily hold true in the interior, like in Chicago, in the Midwest, because it's more of a liquid market. In Texas, it probably wouldn't have as much of an impact, but it'd be somehow split. I think the analysts I've seen said that part of the impact would be eaten by refiners, the value in part would be eaten by producers, but nobody really knows for sure. I think it's safe to say that the Canadian producers would make less and the U.S. consumers would pay more, but what the split would be, I'm not sure anybody really knows. So
Now, I understand Canada has a very complicated relationship with alcohol, and there's a lot of stereotypes for Canadian alcoholism, but there's also some realities where they've got some very stringent DUI laws. So, like, don't you lose your license or something? Like, you can't even get into the country if you've got a DUI from America. So, there's some pretty stringent Canadian laws about alcohol, but on the flip side, there's a lot of stereotypes too. I'm reading that you're pulling Jack Daniels off the shelf
Oh,
in
yeah.
Canada. Is it too American for you up in Canada? What's going on, man?
That's a little snit. So the premier of Ontario, the liquor stores in Ontario it's they're owned by the government. Or they don't have a free market in alcohol. They're all
We have that
government
in
owned.
we have that in Minnesota in a lot of counties too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So Ontario is the province. It's the largest province in Canada. It's the most exposed to the tariffs because it's home to our auto industry. So that will suffer the most. And so they've really come out with the boxing gloves on and they're ready to brawl. And so a lot of these things are symbolic. And they showed the newscasters pulling all of the American liquor off the shelves. We're not doing that here, but they were there. It's a symbolic thing. So the U.S. is such a big economy and it's so powerful and it has so many tools in its toolkit, or it has a very strong hand, as Trump would say. Canada does not have a strong hand. So what we can do is, if we're going to get into a trade war with the U.S., the strategy is like, okay, let's go after the American industries where we can have the most impact. And there are certain industries that sell a lot of booze in Canada, like the bourbon industry, for example. And so that's a symbolic thing where Canada said, okay, we're going to not just put a tariff on to American alcohol imports. We're going to strip them off our shelves. We'll show you guys. So that's us playing what we view as a strong card. Not all of us, but so it's more of a symbolic thing just to show that, hey, we can punch too. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to press this because a millisecond before you said trade war, in my head I went, my goodness, is this a trade war? Because it is. And whether it's symbolic or not, as I'm reading the BBC article, they do $1 billion in Jack Daniel's sales. So it's a little bit more than a symbolic if they can
Oh,
impact the Jack
that's
Daniel's
true.
sales by $1 billion. And I
We have a
get it
drinking
that,
problem.
if we pull Moosehead and Molson Ice off the shelves, it's not going to probably equal that. Moosehead might. That's a really good beer. But I like Moosehead a lot. It's kind of got a good skunky taste to it. But okay. So anyway,
So it's real. Yeah, there's a real impact for
yeah, there's
sure.
a real impact there. So is this the start of a trade war? I mean, it's kind of a canary in the coal mine, if you will, that this could be the start of a trade war where all of a sudden, the Canadian clearly, which we pulled out in the 80s and we got rid of Macintosh caramels for whatever reason, and your Kraft macaroni and cheese is better than ours. And so, yeah, I've heard it all, man. I'm being from Minnesota now. I've heard it all
Yeah.
about the
Well,
Canadian Minnesota
hey, if we can
currencies here.
brag about something, we will. But while we're still on the topic of alcohol, I'll give a shout out to my daughter who said she might listen to this. She's in university taking economics, and so alcohol is near and dear to her heart as a university student. So, hi, Mallory, if you're listening.
But
Yeah,
from an economic standpoint, the oil and gas starts all of your products, obviously.
right.
And you name me one city that wasn't lubricated by alcohol. Maybe a Mormon city, maybe,
Right, right.
maybe
Maybe.
an Amish city, maybe.
Yeah.
But
So no,
outside
it's,
of
it's a
that,
big deal. But
outs-
so is it a trade war? So there's the administration, the Trump administration has been very careful to say this is not a trade war. This is a fentanyl problem, and we're Canada and Mexico. We're trying to get your attention to take fentanyl seriously, and I totally agree with that. Um,
so is
and
this alcohol would be a reaction to the fentanyl? Because alcohol is a problem too. It's not in the same boat as a fentanyl, but is this
yeah,
kind of a, hey,
well,
we're, go
I
ahead.
think the alcohol thing. So Trump has said, Canada and Mexico, we want you to take our fentanyl issue seriously, and we want you to seal up your borders, which obviously are not sealed very well. And even if Canada says they are, they're not. So he said, I'm going to put tariffs on both of you. And then, but Canada has viewed this as a trade war because they're saying, we're okay. We hear you. We're spending money on on more patrol, border patrol, and Canada's allocated 1.3 billion Canadian dollars, which is about 800 US dollars well, more, it's $1 billion, but over like 5 years to enhance border security. But that's really nothing. That's a drop in the bucket. Trudeau came out 2 weeks ago and announced he's going to build a high-speed rail link between Toronto and Montreal, which is like $20 billion. So that kind of thing, I think, is really insulting to the U.S. administration. They're saying, okay, you're willing to kick in $1 billion to enhance border security over 5 years, but you're going to spend $20 billion on a vanity project. We see how that goes in California. It's going to be, anyways. So I think that rankles, and so I think that there's some digging in of the heels on the Trump administration, saying you guys are not taking this seriously enough, whereas Canada's viewing it through the lens of like, we depend on trade, so this is a trade war, and so we're going to turn it into a trade war. So by us retaliating, then that sends out a message to everyone that it is a trade war. And from Canada's perspective, it is a trade war because we send, I don't know what percentage of our exports, I should know that, but it's majority of our exports go to the US. So to us, this is a trade war because it would really significantly damage our economy if these 25% tariffs got on and stayed on. So we view it as a trade war. Trump views it as a fentanyl measure. The truth is somewhere in between. I think it's probably a mix of the two, and depending on who you talk to, that would, you'll get a different answer from various parties. So,
my next comment is for those people out there who are in the literary world. Of course, Terry Etam is an author. End of the Fossil Fuel Insanity, available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, as well as a writer for the BOE Report. And so he'll appreciate this, that the word fantastic has a real definition, not in the colloquial or pop culture sense. There is an actual term for the word fantastic. And it doesn't mean good or bad. It just means it's fantastic, like bigger than life,
yes,
unbelievable. It's like, wow. Okay, what I'm about to read to you is from the President of the United States after issuing tariffs. Okay, this is why this is just fantastic. This is why it's great to be in the content business right now. Here it is from CNBC as of 39 minutes ago. Trump says he's not even looking at the stock market. Tariffs will make U.S. very strong. See, that's how confident we are, man. We're not even looking at it, man. I mean, that's what I mean. Isn't that just fantastic?
Yeah, that defies credulity in every sense of the word. It's an important barometer for Mr. Trump. We all know that. So, yeah.
That's just again, that's just fantastic, because I don't want to say anything negative, don't want to say anything positive. I just want to use the actual Webster's Oxford Dictionary definition of that statement, that we're going to put a bunch of taxes out there, and I'm not even going to look at any companies how they're doing. We're just going to move full steam ahead, baby. I love it. Hey man, God bless America. I had another question for you. Alberta, what's going on there? You guys are, you're in Alberta, right? Calgary?
Yes, I am in Alberta, yep.
And you're lobbying to be the 51st state of the United States, or what's that story all about? You said a small group, or it made some news wires.
Well, there's a very, I think Alberta is most connected to the U.S., I would say, out of any of the provinces. There's a lot of expats, Americans up here. I mean, that came from the oil patch. Like a lot of the when the oil majors were very active here, they were very big here. Chevron, Exxon, they all had Amoco, they all had big offices and a lot of staff, and people came and went back and forth. So there's real cross-cultural, affinity with the U.S. And we're a free enterprise kind of province. I almost said state.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. So you've got Alberta, right? Alberta, and within Alberta, there's Calgary and Edmonton.
Yes.
Okay,
that's correct,
and the NHL hockey team is the Flames, which, if my memory serves me correctly, Calgary is more of a natural gas play than an oil play.
Yeah, well, Calgary is like the energy capital,
Okay.
and oil, and Edmonton is more affiliated with the Oilers.
The
Um,
Oilers, that's where I was
yeah,
going with it. They're just flat out named the Oilers. So, I
it's
mean,
flat
yeah,
out named the Oilers. Yeah,
just like
and
Houston
that
in the
was
NFL days. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Edmonton is much closer to the oil sands, which is like the
Okay.
biggest of the oil. And the first discovery of oil in Alberta was like in the 1940s, I think late 40s, early 50s, and it was just outside of Edmonton. So they became known as the oil capital. But that's where the government is located, and so there's an endless rivalry. Calgary's more of a corporate headquarters. There's a lot of companies that have their Canadian headquarters in
Yeah.
Calgary, huge downtown. Edmonton is more government oriented.
So,
So
from an American standpoint, you guys can bring something to the table. So, like, this could be a done deal because of all the different natural resources you have. I mean,
right,
a Trump would sign that yesterday.
he would. He literally. I'm sure he would. And
I mean,
we
he's trying to get Greenland for the future stuff. You guys already have it.
right. Well, and we had things like the Keystone XL pipeline, which is going to connect the oil sands. I mean, there already is a lot of oil sands oil that flows into the U.S., but the Keystone XL pipeline was literally going to do that. And it's so strange because the pipeline is built through a lot of Alberta and it's built through a lot of the US, and it just kind of stopped on the other side of the border. It would not, I mean, that's being a bit flippant. There's a lot of work to do on it yet, but a lot of work has been done to actually complete that conduit. But Biden shut it down on day one, and Trump wants it reinstated. So, but yeah, Alberta is like the big fuel tank for the US. Like we have oil, we have natural gas. The US has a lot of oil and natural gas now too, obviously, but they're different formations like the shale, like Appalachia Shale, Marcellus, that's running hard. That's producing 35 BCF a day. And it can produce a lot, but it will peter out. It's a finite field. The Permian is like the engine of the U.S. oil world too, and it's I don't know how many million barrels a day come out of that, but there's 300 rigs going every day in the Permian. That too will get exhausted, and I think the U.S. has something like 30 billion barrels of proved reserves. The Alberta oil sands have 160 billion, so it dwarfs and it's over a huge area too. So, anyways, that's more oil than Canada would ever use. So the natural market is the U.S. for it. So Alberta and the U.S. are, and actually the central provinces here are more closely aligned with U.S. northern states like North Dakota and Saskatchewan or Manitoba have more in common than Saskatchewan and Ontario. They just do geographically and weather wise and culturally. We're just more similar, and there's a natural commonality, I would say, between Montana and Alberta, for example, or right down through the U.S. It's so there's more of a north south connection, I would think. And so when people talk about not so much whose side are you on, but who do you feel you have more in common with? Do we in Alberta feel we have more in common with Texas or Ottawa? And a lot of people would say Texas. We're a freewheeling province, just like they're a freewheeling state. We value personal freedom. We value it's more of a conservative base, and I think they're just more of a mentality that we would like to operate more like that, and the governing part of Canada is quite a. I think they're more aligned themselves with Europe. I would say like the people that keep voting in Trudeau, for example, they're Trudeau has a very globalist European kind of vision about things, and
Quebecers.
Quebecer, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
Quebecers. Even I know that down here in America. Yeah.
yeah, and the southern part of Ontario, and the majority of the voters are right in that fairly small area in Canada. Most of Canada has no people in it, and most of the voters are concentrated in that southern Ontario, Quebec region, and so they dictate who runs our country, and we're out here in the West. It's almost like I shouldn't say we have no representation, but we kind of have no representation. We're an afterthought, and they can take our resources for granted. They can do whatever they like as far as like putting carbon taxes on and punitive and over regulatory things. They block pipelines. They know we'll keep producing because we're still making money. We might have to sell it at a big discount to the U.S. our oil and natural gas, but they know we won't stop. We literally will not shut in those pipelines. to our biggest customer, to the U.S. That'd be just a horrible thing to do, and so we're not going to do it. And so everybody knows that. So the politicians can take that for granted. It's like, oh, we can slap them around a little and whatever. They'll keep going. They'll keep cranking out the revenue. Our exports to the U.S. of oil and gas dwarf anything else. So it's very important to the country. But anyways,
Where's Ottawa in the geography of the Canada, of the country? Blah blah blah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, but there's a lot of people nestled in that little region just on top of the Great Lakes, in that little
Okay.
corner. So I think from Toronto you can see Buffalo, and then Ottawa is just a couple hours northeast of that. There's Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, kind of in a line. They're just like a row. They're about 4 hours apart.
I guess I got lost on the way to geography class because I thought Ottawa was more in the center, like above
Well,
Winnipeg or something, more towards Michigan, but more towards Winnipeg than Montreal. Yeah, I'm looking at a map right now. What is that, an hour or two drive?
I think it's 2 hours from
Yeah.
Ottawa to Toronto. Yeah,
So
it's a
Ottawa
center.
and Montreal, man, that and Toronto, that must make up what, 60% of your voting population?
Oh, something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When Trudeau announced this high-speed rail line, he said it would reach 20 million people, and our country's population is 40 million. So at least half is right there. Yeah. So you buy their votes, and there you go. You have a government.
And is Alberta about as big as Texas, Montana? How big is
Uh,
Alberta?
well, I don't know how big Texas's population is.
No,
We're about
geographic wise,
geographically.
geography.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a good question. So I don't even know that
Well, because
myself.
Canada is quite large,
Canada
and
is big. Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot of room to roam out there. And
yeah.
so, when you're talking about Alberta, Canada, Calgary and Edmonton are two cities of size. I don't even know if Saskatchewan has a city over 1 million people. I mean, Moose Jaw
No, they
doesn't
don't.
count.
The whole of Saskatchewan, the province, is just over 1 million.
Yeah,
Uh,
so they're kind of like North Dakota of of
yeah.
Canada, and Wyoming, and
So,
Vermont as well has got a very low population for some reason. The second lowest population according to the
oh,
last.
really?
Yeah, I think Wyoming was last, Vermont, and then either Alaska or North Dakota. South Dakota actually doubled North Dakota's population, which was
Oh, okay.
shocking to me. But anyway,
So
I
I just
actually would love to be at see the United States take on Alberta as a state. I also would like to see him take on Greenland, more just because that's like Lewis and Clark stuff. That's like historic. It's like history books are going to be changed, maps have to be changed. That's like one of those cultural moments when Trump threw out there, we're going to start calling it the Gulf of America. I'm like, oh
yeah.
yeah, now we're talking. We're
We're
good.
already
Now we got to get new maps and everything. Now I'm loving this life. So
yeah.
I would, but actually, in all honesty, um, Alberta would be a fantastic state for the U.S.
Oh,
because
yeah, it
we
would.
would open up that drilling.
Yeah, yeah. So here's the stats. Alberta is, sorry, it's in kilometers, but you'll get the relative size. Alberta is 660,000 square kilometers. Montana is 380, so just over half the size. Texas is 695. So Texas is slightly bigger than Alberta.
Yeah, you could
So
go back to Quebec with all that millimeter stuff, with all that metric system stuff, man. Anyway, so
all you have to remember is Texas is a little bit bigger, but like 5% bigger. So yeah.
yeah,
So
it's a remarkable when you take like Texas or take the state of Alaska and put it on U.S.
oh
It's
yeah,
like it's
it's
like
big.
30% of the country, and that sort
Yes.
of thing. And that's what Canada's like, I mean, you have
It
all
is.
that frozen tundra up there that nobody goes to. You're like one of the largest countries, aren't you? Canada?
Second largest country. Yeah.
Yeah.
Russia is the largest, and Canada, then the US. So
Yeah. And probably the most desolate too, in certain areas
well,
for
yeah,
sure.
least densely populated, I would say.
Yeah,
Like
that's
if you take, like you said, you're looking at your map, half the population or more is in that little tiny area, and then the vast majority of it has very little. So yeah.
so. Anyway, we got to give you a BOE plug. Are you working on any
Sure.
stories that we should plug for the public?
Well, I try not to talk about tariffs because that's just done to death and I can't keep up anyway. So you just try and find something interesting about on the energy sector. Try and either keep up with the times or stay a little bit ahead of it just to try and see where things are going. And I think people like to see that what might the future hold, the short future. And there's so many ways to analyze things. I think that there's the macro, like any of these issues are so complex. It depends. You want to look at it at the international macro level, or the state provincial level, or the industry level, or there's any of these tariffs, for example, have so many different aspects, and energy has so many different aspects, and oil has totally different aspects than natural gas. They're actually like they're all dumped together as like oil, but they're remarkably different. And so yeah, so I just keep pounding away on that, and I enjoy the writing process, and I enjoy the dialogue I get with people. So it's there's energy is a basis of everything, so it's kind of fun to be at the heart of the energy world. Always has been. So
I'll tell you, one of the most controversial topics right now in the oil and gas industry is carbon sequestration. Is
yeah,
that it's dividing, because it's all based on subsidies and the green agenda. And so a lot of oil companies now are going towards that due to the regulatory. And there's a lot of oil companies that are not, because they've been campaigning against that for 40, 50 years. And so it's different, because when you're a business owner, you tend not to do that. When you're, MBA, or just look at the numbers, and you're not used to that blood, sweat, and grit and tears and stuff like that. All you care about is making the numbers work, so you don't really care where
yeah,
it comes from, and you don't understand all those implications. I would like to sometime have a conversation with some oil professionals, and any other industry too, because this happens in ag, it happens in communications. Once you start taking those subsidies, boy, they got you. I mean, look at the highway. That's how they got the seatbelt laws in. It's like, oh, do you want highway funds? Better have a seatbelt.
yeah.
Better have this speed limit. Oh no, we're not forcing you into it. No, not at all. But we're not going to give any money if you don't do it otherwise. So,
Well,
the carbon sequestration though, the state of South Dakota today vetoed eminent domain on carbon pipelines, and so the billion
to build a lot.
dollar Summit carbon pipeline, from the largest pipeline from a company that's never built a pipeline before, which is a little bit controversial too. Uh,
Mhm.
they're going to have to figure out a whole new direction now, possibly, unless Trump vetoes their state law. Comes down from the feds, but that was like huge. Like they might have to like go around the state now, and then
Oh,
North Dakota might be left out, and they'll just plug into Wyoming with this
yeah.
thing. And when I was with we had on Steve Bakken, the Burleigh County Commissioner, who's they've been fighting this Bismarck and Burleigh County, because it's going to disrupt the growth plate, and they're going to have to increase their emergency services millions and millions of dollars to bring in new equipment and new emergency responders and training, and nobody cares except for the locals, right? And so they're like, hey, whoa, stop. And Steve, when he was describing how they're going to have to burrow or dig through Nebraska around South Dakota and all this stuff, I'm going, dude, that's how I used to play Dig Dug back in the 80s. Like, that was like a video game I used to play. Is that how we're doing the economy now? Just like, oh, well, this is how it works on the map, so we'll just do that now. Just
Block that off so we go over
yeah,
here. Yeah.
go over 3 states and
Miss
that
that
kind of
guy.
thing, and all kinds of counties and regulations. Oh, we'll get that done by lunch, guys. Let's take care of that. So, um, again, that's where the business owner and some of the MBA executives, they don't necessarily have the same pedigree
No,
necessarily. Yeah,
no.
and so they're
And the drivers for the whole industry are just different, right? Like they're like a big oil company that might consider doing, if they ever considered doing carbon sequestration before, they would have, it wouldn't have been just for the purpose of sequestration. It would have been for enhanced oil recovery. Like, hey, if we build the
right.
system, we pump CO2 down, we can scrub more oil out. That makes economic sense. Now we're in a new world. It's like, well, why do you want to sequester this carbon? Well, it's like, okay, because we need to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. And so companies look at that and go, okay, so I'm going to spend $1 billion for what again? To make the air cleaner or free of CO2. Oh, is that China building 2 coal plants a week over there? Yeah. So why am I spending this $1 billion again? That's kind of the mentality of it. So then the subsidies come in because no one is going to do this for, it makes no economic sense to do this. You're doing it for this greater social good or the environmental fight. And so companies will say, if they're coerced or encouraged to do it, like I know the US has a price value on carbon that they will pay $80 per ton of CO2 or something. And so there's a financial incentive to do it, but that gets you partway there. But I think they still look at it and go, this is not an economic project. So then that's when the subsidies come in. It's like, okay, how about if we cover 30% of your capital? Now is it economic? And they go, okay, now I'm listening. So, but you're right.
Keep in mind too, these are direct payments too. They're direct.
Oh yeah,
it's not a loan. Yeah, it's just here you go. Go see what you can do, guys. Go have fun. You won the bid.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, and I'm not trying to be facetious or condescending. It's just that's the way it is.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
I'm
mean,
actually involved in some of them in Alberta, or like I'm not building them, but I'm very acutely aware of what's happening. The only ones that are going ahead are the ones that have a guaranteed backstop value of carbon for several decades. And the other ones are like, even technically, they're very challenging. Like which formation are you going to put all the CO2 in? You build a pipeline and you can inject it in one spot. How soon before that's exhausted and you have to build a new pipeline to somewhere else? Because you can't just inject infinite amounts down there. So it's a very expensive proposition. And when the Biden administration or like Trudeau up here was here and they're piling on more and more green regulations and saying if you don't do this, it's going to cost you, or will the rewards for doing it will go up and up and up, like with the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Then it made more sense if you saw a lot of momentum on that side. But I think now with Trump in and like the steps he's taking, pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. I heard that he's banned some scientists from working on climate change papers. I saw that on CNN, a CNN headline. And I think he's going drill, baby, drill. He wants more oil and gas. And I think he's going to be taking, and that's one of the things I'm sure that'll get the axe in the U.S. as well, as subsidies for things like carbon sequestration. He wants to see that go into drilling, and he wants the price of oil to go down, not up. And I think he wants to see interstate pipelines built for natural gas, not for CO2. So I think to the extent that he has his hands on those control levers, then I think that's where everyone is going to go. And then even the biggest proponents of these kind of things, like Europe, the EU, now they're backpedaling, right? Like all of a sudden they're waking up saying, oh, I guess we have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on defense now. There's some stories coming out today from the EU saying we can't afford our social safety nets anymore because we have to spend on defense now. So if they can't afford their social safety nets, can they really afford to be strangling their industry with more green regulations, which is they're doing right now? They're deindustrializing. They're chasing industry out with their more and more stringent regulations. And then countries like the United Kingdom or Britain are saying, hey, look at us, we're cutting our emissions. It's like, yeah, that's really cool because you chased all your industry away. Like, yay, but I don't think so. But that's depends what you want, right? So
gotta wonder how many countries just say, you know what is the point of spending on our military against the U.S.? I mean, I saw a stat at one time, like every country combined doesn't even equal the U.S.'s budget for its military. It's something like that. And then the other one that stood out was Ron Paul. Somebody interviewed Ron Paul back when he was running. I think it was Tim Russert or something, and asked him about Iran. And Ron Paul's like, Iran? No, I'm not worried about them. They don't even have an air force. Like, it's just like, why would I be worried about them? Like, security wise, no, not at all. And I actually busted out laughing. I think my eggs went flying out there. So the tariff thing, though, this could be. Here's a story idea for you with the tariffs, and we'll kind of wind it down after this. But back when NAFTA was coming around, there was a story that I read, and I don't remember everything, but I just remember the takeaway, which was they took an apple orchard in the state of Washington, and there was like a Safeway 75 miles away. Okay, I think Safeway Albertsons is up out of. I think it was Safeway that was up in.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the one that's out of there, right? That's the yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they tracked the apple, and it went 1,000 miles before
Oh,
it
wow.
went. It got back to yeah because of just the way the shipping logistics are, and
Yeah, wow.
so many corporate farms, and it actually went to China and back. The apple, yeah. Instead of going
Whoa.
75 miles to this Albertsons or Safeway down the road. And I remember thinking like, okay, the story is that it actually was cheaper to do that through the system that they have in place
Isn't that bizarre?
than it
Yeah.
was for the apple orchard just to drive it with a bushel of apples. Here you go. It just doesn't work like that. And so that would be interesting. Take the Macintosh caramels or the Kraft macaroni and cheese. Just take a basic product, a bourbon or whatever, and track that. See what happens, with the shipping and
Yeah.
bottles, and with AI would have to do some assistance on some things like um, this weekend when we do the home and garden show. Part of what I'm doing is because I helped bring the event in. We're talking about economic impact in this community. It's a community of 15, 20,000 people, but during the summer it's 250,000. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of lake homes and a lot of river homes, and then during the off season, it's a nice little 15,000 community. You can
Right.
get around quick and yeah, that kind of stuff. And so this show over the course of the next year is going to have a $1 to $2 million economic impact with all the work that's going to be done, and that was done with AI. And I went, oh, now this is next level stuff here.
Yeah.
Is it right? I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it accurate? No idea. Doesn't matter. It looks good. So, all right, man. Any final plugs? Anything we missed out on?
No, covered a lot of ground. So
We
pleasure as
did.
always. Yep. And yeah, if you take us over, well, we'll see you when you get here.
Well, maybe we'll buy you, and then you and I can be American brethren instead of the international connection. And by the way, there's a band out of Seattle. Speaking of Washington and Seattle and Safeway and Apples, and I know you're a Nine Inch Nails fan from our last conversation.
Uh-huh.
One of my favorite bands is called Mother Love Bone, and
I've heard of them.
they're out of Seattle. They were the start of grunge music, and he
Okay.
died. Yeah, he died of like a heroin overdose or something like
Mhm.
that. And then Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell created Temple of the Dog as a tribute to the lead singer of Mother Love Bone. So Soundgarden and Pearl Jam came together to create
Oh,
this.
wow.
Yeah, Say Hello to Heaven and Hunger Strike. Hunger Strike was their big. I'm going hungry. That was their big one. But Mother Love Bone, check them out. Crown of Thorns. Chloe Crown of Thorns. It's like a 15-minute song, but you'll love it.
Okay.
So
Well, you
that's
can
all
plug.
I got today, man.
All right.
We'll catch you.
Okay.
And by the way,
It is.
where can people get your work at?
Yeah, sure. At the BOE report is where I write pretty regularly. And that's BOEREPORT.com. And yeah, my book's available at Amazon